Mixed martial artist Ramsey Dewey published a video a couple days ago, and I was asked to respond to the video. So this is my attempt to respond to the video. I hope that it is satisfactory to the gentleman that asked me to respond. And it's sort of a loaded uh, question. Now, the video by Ramsey Dewey was titled, "Why Non-Fighters Think They Know How to Fight." Why do non-fighters think that they know how to fight? You will more than likely have to watch his video and to see all of the things that he pointed out as to why non-fighters believe that they know how to fight, especially fight a real fighter. I have a sort of an issue when we start or begin to talk about a fighter. What the heck does that mean when we say fighter? Who are we talking about, and in what context are we talking about fighters? Now, we all know or should know that as it relates to, for example, professional boxing, those guys are usually called fighters, professional fighters, in the sporting sense. We all know or should know that people who get paid for fighting in a ring in a sporting type atmosphere that are doing kickboxing, for example, like back in the day, Joe Louis, Bill Superfoot Wallace, Howard Jackson, Benny Urquidez, Don the Dragon Wilson, and so on. Those people that fought in the ring during those days were considered fighters. There were many others, that were even female kickboxers, as it were. But just to name a few. And even today, there's still professional kickboxers, even Muay Thai boxers that are considered professional fighters. Now, when you ask the question, why do non-fighters believe that they can fight? My first comprehension of that would be that you must be talking about people who believe that they can beat professional fighters. Okay? So I'm going to answer probably two different questions that are similar questions. I'm going to answer both of them in terms of how I perceived it. So if you're talking about people who have never had any formal training in sports martial arts or in professional boxing or even amateur boxing, people who have never had formal training and learned the foundational skills and then in turn develop their own skill set, I see where he's coming from. Those individuals just cannot simply assume that they can beat someone or dominate someone who has spent hours training, many years training at their craft of boxing, of full contact karate or kickboxing. You just cannot take it for granted that I can step in the ring and whoop this particular individual. It does not work that way because there are certain skills that you must possess to be a formidable proponent or even opponent in fighting or professional fighting, more specifically professional fighting. Now, I can compare this to karate just in general or kung fu. There have, since the Bruce Lee era, came all types of individuals who never had a real instructor, never had a traditional instructor, never been in a dojo or a kung fu school or a judo school or what have you, they pretended that they actually knew martial arts because they would watch a video or they would watch martial arts movies, or someone that they actually knew may have participated in the martial arts. They would copy some moves from those individuals, and then coupled with their ego or their inflated ego and maybe some narcissistic tendencies as well, they believed that they could compete against anyone who actually studied martial arts for years and actually were skilled. So I could see Ramsey Dewey, I could see his point there. Now, I agree with him that you need to be taught by a competent instructor for the most part, to at least get the fundamentals and the basics, if you will, down. And through blood, sweat, tears, many hours, many thousands of hours of training on your techniques, coupled with realistic training with a partner who is indeed resisting you, who is opposing you, his own physical energy being applied against you. This is what determines your outcome as an average, below average, or even an above average fighter. Stop right there. Now, here's the other answer for the other type of fighter. This may not be what some people thought I was going to respond like, but it is what it is. Let me tell you what I know. Sometimes we put too much emphasis on people having formal training, and we try to make it seem and or appear that you must have some sort of technical training to be able to fight. And I use the term fight in this particular instance loosely. And I tell you why. We should not be thinking about fighting as a part of our everyday existence. You see, when you are practicing or studying the art of pugilism or fighting or martial arts, that's one type of individual. But everyone doesn't study those things. Everyone does not practice some art of fighting. So would you say that they can't fight or would not fare very well if they had to fight? Would you say that they have to have some formal training? If you are saying that, then you're saying that every living man, woman, and child need to be taught fighting. I don't know of any society that we have in current day America or any other country where every single living human being is taught to fight, physically fight. So I said that to say this, and I'm going to use this as an example of this point, this particular point that I'm trying to make. If the average, let's say American, and there's a man who has a wife and children in his home, and he has no martial arts training, no self-defense training, he has no gun training, he has no boxing training, never been in the military. So someone breaks into his home and begins to assault let's say his son and his wife or his daughter, I believe that despite the fact that he has no type of training, that he will defend his family to the best of his ability, with or without a weapon, and without ever having any formal training in any formal school, organization, club, or whatever, and that he can potentially fare very well because he has purpose. This is old school talking to you now. This is something that most of these young generation martial arts practitioners know nothing of. You see, I've been at this about 50 years. I'm not an upstart. I just didn't start this 10 years ago, or 15 or 20 years ago. Almost 50 years. So now, this man, he's walking down the street with his girlfriend or his wife, and two guys approach him. Let's say they don't have any weapons. They say something off the cuff to his wife. He ignores it. He's paying attention to both of them, and he continues to walk. One guy grabs his wife's arm. The husband or the boyfriend intervenes and say, "Hey sir, we don't want any trouble, stop." And then they begin to attack this man, while the other guy is grabbing hold of his wife's or girlfriend's arm. That man then has purpose. Now, it is true that it depends on what man we're talking about. It could be a man who's very passive, who's very fearful, but I'm not talking about that guy right now. We know that that type of individual does exist, but his response or their response is always going to be dependent upon how they were raised, whether or not they have inhibitions or certain fears of society or even people or what have you. But for the most part, we're talking about a man who has purpose. You're trying to harm his companion or his children. He's going to stand in front of them. I'm not talking about isolated events and remote situations where you have someone who won't do that. I'm talking about a man. So he stands in front of his wife or girlfriend, plants his feet firmly on the ground. No one is saying that he's going to throw a reverse punch or a back fist or a hammer fist, or he's going to execute a side kick or a round kick. But that man is going to do everything within his power to protect his family without any martial arts training, without any boxing training, without any self-defense training. And he can still fare very well. Why? Again, because he has purpose. So, what I'm trying to do in this explanation is to say to you this: we need to dispel the idea that just because someone has not walked in a dojo and paid an instructor for monthly classes for several years and gained some sort of experience and or rank in a particular martial discipline, we need to dispel the idea that that individual who has never walked into a school, dispel the idea that that individual is not capable of protecting his family against an assailant. We are giving the assailant in a street confrontation too much credit. What makes him a greater fighter? What makes that individual a greater fighter than a man who's defending his family? I tell you this that I know for a fact. True story. When I was in elementary school, I was studying martial arts. I was silly. I was sort of playful. I would joke around with my friends, as a lot of little boys did in school. And we played the dozen. We joked around. I had one friend who was my best friend to this very day as I'm speaking. We used to pick on him. He picked on me. They picked on one another. We picked on everyone in a playful way, as you do in elementary school. And he had sort of a temper. One day we were walking home, and I remember this vividly. We were walking home, and I could see that he was getting angry as we were walking in a crowd, maybe 5 or 6 of us. And they kept joking with him. And so I sort of joined in. But I love him. He's a very good friend of mine. But I was jogging with him because we were going back and forth. And I was jogging with him. I saw I didn't realize how much of a temper he had until later. But anyway, as I was jogging with him, I noticed him pick up a rock. And he clutched it in his hand. I saw him do this. I didn't stop to think why he was doing it. But as we were walking and he got angry, whatever we said between one another, despite my so-called martial arts training, and I know that he wasn't a fighter, and he was not. To this day he is. But he wasn't a fighter. But he did what came instinctively to him. He closed that rock up. It was a medium-sized rock in his hand. And he hauled off and he hit me. And you know what? I sort of froze. I was stunned. Not simply because I got hit, but I was not expecting that from him. And I knew he wasn't a fighter. So, I'm saying it to say this. You don't have to have formal training of any sort to protect yourself on the spot if something happens just like that. It is not to say that it is not smart, that it is not advantageous, that it is not wise to take up some form of self-defense or martial training or even boxing. Because I believe in today's world, we all need to know something about self-protection. Even if it means learning how to handle a firearm and protect ourselves that way. Learning how to shoot a gun, in other words. I believe today we should. But at the same time, we cannot say if an individual's back is against the wall and they have no training in fighting. We can never say for sure or certain that the outcome is going to be that they're going to be the victim. They could very well prevail in that instant because they have purpose. Adrenaline is flowing. Anxiety, maybe even fueled by fear. Whatever the case, that person could potentially harm their assailant. So, I remember Bruce Lee made a statement when he was living. Something on this order. He said that in a fight, no matter how skilled you are, if you are attacking someone or engaged in a fight with a man who might be less skilled than you, if that less skilled opponent or man determines in his mind, and this is not a joke, if he determines in his mind that he's going to rip your ear off, he could be afraid of you. But if he determines and sets it in his mind that he's going to rip your ear off, pull it off with his hand, or even bite it off, chances are he's going to do it. You know why? Because he has a purpose. So, the answer to Ramsey Dewey's statement about why do people who are not fighters believe that they can beat fighters? In the true sense of fighters, when you're talking about professional fighters, those guys who think that they can beat professional fighters is because they have been ill informed and they are running on a highly inflated ego, and they have not experienced a true fighter. I'm just saying. But on the flip side of that, for the average man, you can't make that statement. How can he believe that he's going to beat a real fighter? So if he were in a street confrontation and someone in the street who fights all of the time, and he is, quote, a street fighter, unquote, and he's assaulting a man who's not that skilled in street fighting, but he's done no harm to this other individual, I put my money on the man who doesn't have the training. Because if he's truly a man and he's protecting himself and or his family, and he has purpose, chances are that so-called street fighter has a problem on his hands. That was all I had to say. What say you? Brother Teacher out.